day and welcome to Straight Talk. Straight Talk is a weekly interview program reaching you on Premier FM 93.5 from the stable of Radio Nigeria, Ibadan. I am your anchor on the program, Olutola Daramola. On today's edition, we'll be examining an issue that is of concern not only to stakeholders in Nigeria, but in the global community, especially in the African continent, and it is female genital mutilation, cutting, known as FGMC. And our guest is the Programs and Media Manager for Onelife Initiative for Human Development, Mr. Shola Fagorusi. You're welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you so much for having me here.
When we say female genital mutilation, stroke cutting, as it is known now, also known as female circumcision, this is an age-long practice which is still on in some parts of the country, and Africa especially. What exactly is this FGMC?
Okay, so when we say FGMC, it's an acronym that does not mean federal government money or whatever it is. Or, like some people would say it's called female circumcision. That's to the layman out there. But in terms of standardization of the term used to refer to this practice, it's known as female genital mutilation, or some individuals call it female genital cutting. But, to put all of this together, we say FGM/C, which means female genital mutilation/cutting. And when we talk about female genital mutilation, we're talking about all procedures which involve the total or partial removal of all or, some of the external female genitalia for cultural or non-medical reasons. So this is the classification that you have international organizations like the World Health Organization, coming together to say, look, what literally happens to our girls and women is not circumcision, because in saying this, what happens is that we begin to look at it from the perspective of male circumcision. So really, it's not female circumcision. It is mutilation, it is cutting. And if you look at, the dictionary meaning of, mutilation, it means to cause injury, to cause damage to something, to cause severe harm to something. So that's exactly what, female genital, mutilation/cutting in this instance is all about.
Okay, when we say cultural or non-medical reasons, what exactly are we referring to?
Okay, so again, looking at the very broad definition of female genital mutilation, it's classified into 4 different types. You have what is called the type 1, we have type 2, type 3, and then type 4. But if you look at that definition, we're saying that it is done for cultural reason, and then it is done for non-medical reason. Anything you do to the external female genitalia of a woman or a girl, for these 2 reasons, that's what is called female genital mutilation. Now, cultural in the sense that people give justification for what it is that they do. They say, look, it's part of our culture. This is what our fathers have done. We have to continue doing it. But again, we understand that female genital mutilation is also classified as one of those, issues you have under harmful traditional practices. If you talk about gender-based violence, some of these are actually classified as this. Growing up, you would have instances, for instance, where mothers would actually have to force feed their children, believing that, no, this is how it is done. And that's actually a harmful practice in that sense. You have several of those practices when to actually remove, part of the umbilical cord of a child. Mothers would put damp towel on top of a lantern and then use it on the navel, of the child. These are traditional practices. When you talk about things like, having tribal marks, for instance, these are also, traditional practices and harmful cultural practices that we have seen. And again, one thing we, sure about culture is the fact that culture is dynamic. Culture is not static. What was, good culture for us yesterday is no longer culture, for instance, today. It was part of culture in some part of the country at some point to actually kill twins. That is no longer our own culture around it. So that's exactly what we're saying, that with respect to female genital mutilation, once it has to do with culture, once it also has to do with non-medical reasons, then we're talking about FGM in this instance. Secondly, with respect to, non-medical reasons, there might be reasons, for instance, for the doctor to excise part of, the woman's external genitalia. Maybe she's trying to give birth. Her cervix is not, big enough to actually allow the baby to pass through. That may actually happen. In that instance, it is not female genital mutilation. We also have what is called the Bartholin gland, for instance, that is responsible for secretion for women. Okay, if that has to be excised because of inflammation, it is no longer, female genital mutilation. But once it is done because it is assumed that, look, this part of the body is a vestige organ, it's not important for the girl, and then it is removed, then we talk about female genital mutilation.
Some time ago, there was a report on BBC that circumcision was used to cure AIDS. I'm sure this is a myth. What can you say about this?
There's been several myths, for instance, around this issue to say that, if you actually mutilate a girl child, you are sure that the girl child will not actually have HIV/AIDS. But on the contrary, what happens is that in societies and, communities where it is a culture that girls are actually lined up, and it is it is like a passage to womanhood. What we basically see happen is that if the same instrument is used, and if one of those girls or one of those women or one of those ladies, for instance, already has, HIV infection, what would happen is that it will be passed to, other girls as well. So on the contrary, instead of saying that it's actually a means to actually cure, we've also had people who say that if you actually, have sexual intercourse with a virgin, for instance, you would actually get cured of HIV. We even had a president of a country, who was literally flocked, online because, for saying this. So again, it's one of those myths. And then we have several of these myths around, female genital mutilation. Some say, for instance, that it helps, address the issue of promiscuity. Of course, we know that this is also a myth. That, whether a child will become promiscuous or not has nothing to do with, mutilation. It has to do with parental upbringing. You want to talk about the environment that child grew up. You want to talk about the socialization, structure that child passed through, the school, the peers, the parents, religious institutions like the church or the mosque, as the case may be. Some also come around and say that, look, one of the reasons we also have to do this is because when the head of the child touches the clitoris, the child will die. We also know that this is also a myth. Some also come and say that, that part of the body is not beautiful enough, and so to make it beautiful, it has to be cut. Some also come around and say, that look, if you do not cut that part of the body, it will grow, in the reproductive life of the girl. But we know that these are all myths. These are all superstitions. These are all reasons that people have given, for instance, to justify their engaging in female genital mutilation. But there is no truth to any of this.
Okay, you mentioned 4 types. What are the differences?
Okay, so we have the type 4 called clitoridectomy. When we talk about type 1 rather, called clitoridectomy. Now, this involves, cutting part or all of the clitoris, okay? We also have the type 2, and what happens in type 2 is that part or all of the clitoris is cut, and then the labia minora, that's the inner lip, of the external female genitalia, is also cut. And then we have type 3, which involves excising the clitoris, removing the labia minora, and also removing the labia majora, and then stitching, the two parts together to leave just a narrow opening for urine, for menstrual pain. And we're not talking about something far-fetched. We still have this according to the data that actually helps us to understand where it is we need to work, which is called the NDHS, the National Demographic and Health Survey. The latest one is 2013 report, and shows that in places like some parts of Bayelsa, some parts of Nasarawa, still have instances of this happening in some locations here in Nigeria. So type 3 is one of the extreme form of female genital mutilation, because apart from stitching together the woman, when the woman wants to actually deliver a child as well, it also means that the woman needs to be cut open again. And again, we also have what is called type 4, and type 4 is also very prevalent in the southeastern part of the country, part of type 4, which tells you again that type 4 is actually called unclassified, because again, we started seeing several instances of female genital mutilation, and for want of how to even start classifying them, maybe we'll have been talking about type 10 now, but the WHO said, look, every other thing that happens apart from type 1, 2 and 3 should be classified as type 4. Now, for type 4, what we have seen is that parents, for instance, in the southeastern part of the country will come together and say, look, we need to massage the clitoris of the child. Now, biological sciences would also explain to you that, the male reproductive organ has about 4,000 nerve endings, while the female, reproductive, organ, in this instance, the clitoris, has about 8,000 nerve endings. Now, what parents do in trying to massage the clitoris every time, a baby girl has to actually have a bath, is that they try to deaden that organ. It's one of the most sensitive organs, for the female child. They tend to deaden that organ. So meaning that even before the reproductive life of that girl starts, it's already terminated. That's the implication of this. And then we're beginning to see people who say, look, we don't do FGM here, but what we do is to just massage the clitoris. We're still talking about not doing maybe type 1 or type 2, but engaging in type 4.
Now let's focus on the Southwest. What is the percentage of girls, ladies, women that are involved in this practice, using Oyo State as a case study?
Okay, so let me come from the the national perspective. So over the world, we say about 200 million girls and women have actually been mutilated. This is the statistics available from UNICEF. And then Nigeria has a prevalence of about 24.7%. Okay, Nigeria doesn't have the highest in terms of prevalence. When you talk about 24.7%, you have countries like Somalia, Djibouti, having the highest in terms of prevalence. But because of our population, it turns out that Nigeria has the highest number of girls and women between ages 15 and 49 that have actually been mutilated, which puts our figure at about 19.9 million, approximated to about 20 million girls and women in Nigeria that have been mutilated. Let's break this down again. So the NDHS 2013 again gives us, a detailed breakdown of this and says that Osun State has the highest prevalence in Nigeria, followed by Ebonyi State, followed by Ekiti State, followed by Imo State, and our own dear Oyo State here has a prevalence of 65.6%. If you break Oyo State down again in terms of prevalence, you begin to see locations like Kajola local government. You're talking about the likes of Okeo having the highest in terms of prevalence, followed by locations like Ogbomoso South and North, followed by Oyo West, followed by Ibarapa local government as well. These are the 4 local governments with the highest prevalence, where we've had to go and engage people, find out the practices. Why do you do this? Do what is called community dialogue, engage in community sensitization, have community champions who can take the message in their own form and begin to talk to people. So this is the reality in terms of data available to show very clearly that it is a major concern for us here in Oyo State. And one of the things we have seen here in Oyo State is the fact that people argue and say that, look, female genital mutilation has religious premise. But what again we found out very clearly in terms of from historical data is that FGM actually predates either Islam or Christianity, so it has nothing to do with Islam. So oftentimes when we have to go into these communities where we know that there are biases in terms of religion, we always go with an Islamic cleric, we always go with a pastor so that they can speak the language of the people. And our cleric there in Kajola would always tell them that, look, the law of the land is the law of Islam. That is what the Quran says. So if the law says, for instance, that, look, this is what it actually, we actually want to actually happen, then anybody who is actually a law-abiding citizen, whether Christian or Muslim, should actually abide by the law. Not forgetting again that there's a law in Nigeria that actually prohibits engaging in female genital mutilation. We have what is called the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which was passed into law, by the administration of Goodluck Jonathan in 2015. And that law says that, look, if you engage in this, either you support or you get, someone to actually engage in this practice, we're talking about a fine of 500,000 naira and 4 years imprisonment. Now, that is even the federal law. Let's come back to the state. So here in Oyo State as well, luckily for us, we also have the Child Right Law, which was passed in 2006, following the Child Right Act, which was passed in Nigeria in 2003. So the Child Right Law, the CRL 2006, says that it is also a criminal for any citizen or any resident in Oyo State to actually violate the right of a child or a woman, and so puts a fine of about 100,000 and 2 years imprisonment for these as well. So these are premises to show you what exactly it is here for us here in Oyo State. But oftentimes when we go to communities to engage, we always try to look at things more from the health perspective to say, look, these are the dangers you actually put the girl child into. These are the dangers you actually put the woman into when you actually engage in female genital mutilation.
Looking at it from the perspective of law, laws have never been a problem in this country. We enact laws from time to time, but the implementation is the problem. In 2015, when the Goodluck Jonathan administration came up with this law, not many states have domesticated it till date. What do you think is responsible for this delay, which is further propagating the practice?
Okay, so it's always interesting. Just like you said, I agree with you that laws are usually not our problem. It's always about implementation. So it's just last week, with respect to the Freedom of Information Act, a high court in Lagos ruled and said that, look, if it's a federal law, as long as it's a federal law, states have to abide by this law. Okay, which means that even though we have, the federal law which talks about VAP, the Violence Against Person Prohibition Act, states, whether they actually have their own variant or not, need to actually abide by this. But it is also interesting to note that even before the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act actually came to bear in 2015, we already had, I think we have about 19 states in Nigeria who have their own version of laws prohibiting female genital mutilation. We have Bayelsa State, for instance. We have Edo State. We have Osun State. We have Lagos State. The administration of Adebayo in Ekiti State had a single law that just went about FGM. It's a 4-page law. I think it was passed in year 2000 or so in Ekiti State that just talked about FGM, not that it was part of several other laws. So the laws are really not the problem, like you said. But again, it's the implementation. But again, pray. How do you arrest your mother? how do you arrest your father? How do you arrest your sister? Because it's not like an outsider really comes around and says, we must forcefully go and mutilate this child. It is the parents that actually take their own children to, places where they can actually mutilate. And again, we've also had to have, several of these conversations to say, look, the real solution will lie in killing the demand. If you kill the demand for female genital mutilation, you put the circumcisers out of business of engaging in mutilation for the girl child. Of course, some of them are actually trained in the sense that they can also do other things. A community here in our own Oyo state, someone was sharing, another organization working around this, that the community itself eventually decided, after they had seen all the very logical reasons, and said, look, we will stop circumcising, what they call it, our female child. But for every male child that we circumcise, we will charge double the price. Which was actually a solution that came in, right from their own domain there. But again, I personally believe that is even an affront on the law, because oftentimes when we engage with, some of these circumcisers and all of that, they say that, look, government has to give us something else to do this. But again, look, if government says don't sell hemp, and then you come and say hemp is my business, you must give me another, I think it's an affront and, and a slap on the law. But, very clearly as well, we've had, some of these circumcisers, in Yoruba, they say, Omo Kinkulowo Nicola. But the question, people have always failed to ask them is, when the Onikola leaves, what happens to this child? Okay, after the Onikola is gone, this child starts suffering from, blood loss. And is it not surprising even that we just have one type of male circumcision? Everybody knows when you go to the hospital, the doctor tells you, look, you need to bring that child. The nurses will remind you. Okay, but again, when you talk about FGM, it seems that someone makes a mistake, it becomes a type. Another person does another type, it becomes a mistake, it becomes another type. So these are, global concerns, these are national concerns around this. And, we're excited that as much as possible, so from the NDHS report, from what we had in 2008 to 2013, we've had, about 4-point-something reduction in terms of prevalence. But again, the fear is that Nigeria's population is growing geometrically. Okay, so it technically would even amount to nothing. And in terms of, the states as well, coincidentally, Ekiti, which is regarded as the fountain of knowledge, even though it's currently number 4 in terms of prevalence, what we have also seen very clearly is that Ekiti state, according to, research, looks to be like the state where we will not have much progress in terms of abandoning the practice. And let me shock you, the same way we call it the Dabe for Mobirin in Yoruba here, several parts of Ekiti state that they call it Shishewa for Mobirin. And ask me, how do you beautify a girl child by actually causing injury to her health, to her reproductive right? Because again, it's also a human right issue.
You're still tuned to Premier FM 93.5 from the stable of Radio Nigeria, and the program is Straight Talk. We're treating female genital mutilation / cutting, and our guest is Mr. Shola Fagorusi, an advocate of this issue. So, when we talk about the law, does it have anything to do with male circumcision? There's no law about that.
Okay, so every time we have to program around this, we try not to get into this conversation about male circumcision. There's also another dominant, school of thought that says that, look, male circumcision should not happen. It should actually leave the male child and all of that. But like we said, the reason why, male circumcision is really done is because of hygienic practice. And if you remember the definition around FGM, we said it is done for non-medical reasons. There's a medical, justification for actually doing this. But again, the authorities when it comes to the human anatomy, the authorities when it comes to care of the body are medical doctors. It's so broad a field, for instance, that you have different fields. You have the ear, nose, and throat doctors. You have the dentists. So how come just someone who has no medical proficiency in some instances where this is done on older girls. The girls, of course, they won't even cut a part of your body. Even to get injection in the hospital, you know how some of us actually cringe. How much more when you actually want to use a sharp object to excise a part of the body. So really, if you do not get male circumcision done in the hospital, in Nigeria today, it's not like a crime. But doctors would always recommend, nurses will recommend that you get it done. But there is no hospital you can walk in today. Okay, there is no medical doctor who can beat his chest and come out in the open and say, look, I was the one that did mutilated this child. Or a nurse or a community health extension worker that we call CHOOS that can come out and say, I was the one that mutilated this child. The person would literally lose his or her practice. Male circumcision is actually included in the medical curriculum. It is not. Female genital mutilation is not included in the medical curriculum. If anything, they are taught, to actually talk to mothers during antenatal care about the need for them not to do that.
All right. By virtue of your advocacy work, let's go back to these Onikolas. In some states of this country, especially the southwest, you have Agbole Olola and all that, and this practice has been on forever. Of course, we'll look at how hygienic, how civil this practice is and what is being done on your part and some other organizations doing the same thing to discourage this act, apart from the one you mentioned earlier, taking along the imams, the pastors, and those who can speak their languages?
So several other sensitizations have been done by several groups to bring circumcisers together. But just like you also have, in cases where, Nigeria has been trying to address the issue of, militancy in the Niger Delta, for instance. For every gun you see them come around to drop, there's another gun somewhere in the creek as well. So for us as well, it's also the belief that for every knife some of these individuals actually come to drop, okay? And you actually have several other knives at home, you have several other individuals. But in all fairness, we've seen several of them that we've also had to engage, who are also part of what we do, okay? Some of them are pretty old, so it's always difficult for us to actually move them around, who have also begun to speak up, to say that, look, we now believe that this has no benefit, even though initially some of them used to say that, oh, no, it's some quacks that are doing those other ones that you're talking about. But we're saying that, look, cool evidences. It wasn't just something that came around in terms of a conclusion. The approach has really changed from, saying that we need to continue engaging, the circumcisers. Again, because of what we see in terms of our own cultural, value here. We do not discuss sexuality in the public. We don't. I can't start. If I ask you, for instance, who was the first person to discuss, menstruation with you, it would probably not be your mother. It would be someone you actually met in school. If I ask a boy child out there that, have you ever had your father sit you down to discuss wet dreams? We do not discuss our sexuality. It's always difficult to actually have that, that conversation. So that's why we're also moving advocacy to say, look, we need to begin to address this for the next generation of mothers. We have several of these campaigns online now. We put, information in the newspaper. We're on air, for instance. We've actually bought into the idea that, look, we need to use the power of the media, for instance, to amplify female genital mutilation. And so that's why we're, writing to media houses. Like I said, the real approach here is kill the demand, and then the supply naturally will drain off. You run, you sell books, for instance. If tomorrow everybody's no longer using books, we're all using tablets, naturally, you would go back and re-strategize.
All right. The traditional rulers are the custodians of culture. What are you doing in this regard? Is there any form of collaboration with them to end this age-long practice?
Oh, fantastic. We've had, the Alafi of Oyo actually be part of what we're doing. We've had, the Olu of Iwo as well, who has, publicly voiced. So we have actually had to get a lot of traditional rulers. We've actually paid advocacy visit to some of them. In some instances, it's just to know what it is that they actually think about this. We've also had, the Oni of Ife as well, also voice, to say that, look, this practice also needs to end. We have it on video as well, so that we can make sure that people who actually, are strong believers of these traditional institutions, and those who actually represent this institution, have a reason to actually have change of mind.
All right. On a final note, what are some of the challenges, especially psychologically, that those on whom this practice is carried out experience? And in the course of advocacy, what are the challenges you face?
The challenges for these individuals, apart from the fact that some of them may actually die almost immediately from too much blood loss, another challenge we're beginning to see is the fact that in societies or communities where women do not go for antenatal care, then it is a major worry that we might actually lose these mothers, and then they can become the statistics of maternal mortality in Nigeria. Because why is this important? Because what happens is that, especially if it's going to be the first birth, the doctor needs to review your history, know exactly what is happening. We had a case recently where Professor Sunday Adeoye, who is in charge of the National Obstetrics and Fistula Center in Abakaliki, Ebonyi, so was explaining to us that the couple actually came around, and by the time they did all the medical history and all of that, they saw that what had been happening was not opening available was the anus, and that's exactly what had been happening between both of the partner. But if this does not happen, if antenatal review and care doesn't happen, what happens is that by the time that woman is going to give birth, if she doesn't know, she might lose so much blood, so much tear might happen that she would invariably lose her life. Again, the tissue around that part of the body are very light, very soft, okay, and so that predisposes them to a lot of danger. So that's why we're saying that a major challenge we're beginning to see is that we need women and girls, okay, who don't know what their status is. Like I mentioned, we don't discuss our sexuality. Unlike the man whose reproductive organ is located outside the body, some women have never for once even checked to say, look, this is what I know that my body looks like. They don't even know what the ideal is. So we need girls and women to actually, before especially their first birth, go into hospitals, see a gynecologist, do medical check up, check to be sure that they actually have the capacity to actually give birth. Because again, it is especially here in the Southwest where it is done where the child is just 8 days old. Again, another challenge is that we're trying to get as much, of our pastors involved in this. HIV/AIDS actually, we gain a lot of traction with ending HIV/AIDS because we got pastors, clergies, imams, and so even before you get married, they do, they ask you to go and bring, results. And so people got involved to say, oh, I need to do tests and all of that. So we also want our pastors, our clerics, our imams to begin to actually counsel couples, intending couples that, look, when you have a girl child, do not do this, to her. Finally, we are also, hopeful that, some of our challenges in terms of communities accepting us, listening to what we have to say as well. We're also not going from the aspect of the law. We're strictly moving from the aspect of, the health angle. Psychologically, the woman can actually get very depressed. The woman may not enjoy her sexual life, which also puts that marriage at the risk of divorce, which we are seeing climb astronomically, sadly, here in Nigeria. Divorce used to be something that we usually didn't have conversation around, but young people are becoming expressive. Younger couples want to also enjoy, sexual bliss in their marriage, and a female genital mutilation literally denies, girls of this. But again, the solution lies in them knowing and then going to see, our medical professionals who can run them through what they need to do in terms of taking care of, of their own health. But in all, what we've seen very clearly is that female genital mutilation has no health benefit whatsoever.
And it will be stopped.
Yes, it should be stopped. And so that's why we're having this conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Shola Fagorusi, Programs and Media Manager, Onelife Initiative for Human Development. I must say it's been very enlightening and educative having you on this program to talk about female genital mutilation / cutting. And until next week when we come your way again, same time, same station, and with another guest, on behalf of Nafiu Busari, my producer, and Modupe Olatubosun, studio engineer, I am your anchor on the program, Olutola Daramola, asking you to enjoy the rest of your day.